The frigid waters of the Pecos River closed around Daisy Armstrong's body like a vise, stealing her breath and turning her limbs to lead as the swift current pulled her under. She had only meant to cool her feet at the riverbank after the long, dusty ride from Santa Fe, but the treacherous edge had crumbled beneath her boots, plunging her into the depths before she could even scream. Panic seized her as her heavy skirts became waterlogged, dragging her deeper into the murky waters that reflected the golden New Mexico sunset. Thomas Thornton spotted the woman's struggle from where he'd been watering his horse 50 yards upstream. Without a second thought, he kicked off his boots, threw his prized Stetson to the ground, and dove into the churning river. The cold water hit him like 1,000 needles, but he powered through it with strong, determined strokes toward the flash of cornflower blue fabric, now barely visible beneath the surface. The year was 1876, and the New Mexico territory was still wild and untamed, much like the spirits of both the desperate woman fighting for her life and the cowboy risking his to save her. Daisy's lungs burned as she flailed against the current, her vision dimming at the edges. Just as darkness threatened to overtake her, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her upward. She broke the surface with a violent gasp, coughing and sputtering as air rushed back into her desperate lungs. "I've got you, madam. Just hold on," a deep voice commanded near her ear as the stranger's powerful strokes cut through the water, moving them steadily toward the shore. When they finally reached the riverbank, Thomas hauled the woman onto solid ground before pulling himself up beside her. She collapsed into a heap, coughing up river water while he caught his breath, water streaming from his soaked clothing. "Are you all right?" he asked, pushing his dripping dark hair from his eyes. Daisy nodded weakly, still unable to speak as she shivered violently in her sodden dress. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas shrugged off his waterlogged vest and quickly moved to retrieve his dry jacket from his saddle. "Here, wrap yourself in this," he said, draping the garment around her trembling shoulders. "I'm Thomas Thornton. Most folks just call me Tom." "Daisy Armstrong," she replied, pulling the jacket tighter around her. "I was just trying to cool my feet. I didn't realize how unstable the bank was." "The Pecos is deceptive that way," Thomas said, moving to gather wood for a fire. "Spring thaws make the edges weak. You're lucky I happened to be passing by." As Daisy watched her rescuer efficiently build a small fire, she studied him properly for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though at the moment his expression was serious with concern. "Where were you headed before your unexpected swim?" Thomas asked, striking a match to light the kindling. "Alamosa, Colorado," Daisy replied. "I'm to take a teaching position there." She hesitated, suddenly realizing the precariousness of her situation. Her belongings were strapped to her horse, which had bolted when she'd fallen into the river. "My horse. All my possessions." "Don't worry about that now," Thomas said, seeing the distress on her face. "Once you're warm, I'll help you look for your mount. Horses usually don't go far." As the fire grew, casting warm light against the approaching twilight, Daisy felt a curious mix of gratitude and unease. She had been raised to be wary of strangers, especially in these untamed territories, but there was something about Thomas Thornton's steady gaze that inspired trust. "Are you headed to Alamosa too?" she asked, hoping to break the awkward silence that had fallen between them. Thomas nodded. "I am. Got a small cattle operation north of town. Been in Santa Fe selling some stock and picking up supplies." He gestured to his pack horse, laden with bundles. Plan to make a few more miles before nightfall, but I reckon we'll be camping here tonight." The word "we" hung in the air, highlighting Daisy's predicament. A proper lady would never spend the night alone with a strange man, but she had little choice given the circumstances. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Thornton," she said, sitting up straighter. "But I wouldn't want to delay your journey. Once we locate my horse, I can continue on my own." Thomas fixed her with a steady look. "Miss Armstrong, night's falling fast. You're soaking wet and these parts aren't safe for a woman traveling alone. I'd be a poor excuse for a gentleman if I left you to fend for yourself." Before Daisy could respond, a distant whinny caught their attention. Thomas stood immediately. "That might be your horse. Stay by the fire and warm up. I'll take a look." As he disappeared into the gathering darkness, Daisy hugged his jacket closer. Despite her independent nature, she was grateful for his help. Teaching positions for unmarried women were scarce, and the offer from Alamosa had been too good to refuse, even if it meant traveling alone through dangerous territory. Thomas returned 15 minutes later, leading a chestnut mare with white socks. "Found your friend here about a quarter-mile downstream, drinking at the river's edge," he said, tying the horse near his own mount. "Looks like all your belongings are still intact." Relief washed over Daisy. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost everything." "Well, you didn't," Thomas said simply, returning to the fire. He pulled provisions from his saddlebag and began preparing a simple meal. "Hope you don't mind jerky and beans. It's not fancy, but it'll fill your belly." As they ate, Daisy learned that Thomas had come west after the war between the states, seeking a new beginning like so many others. He'd worked as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy his own small spread outside Alamosa 3 years ago. "And what brings a young lady like yourself to teach in a frontier town?" he asked, passing her a tin cup of hot coffee. Daisy wrapped her fingers around the warm metal. "My father passed last year. There wasn't much left after his debts were settled, and I needed to make my own way." She took a sip, appreciating the bitter warmth. "I've always loved learning and books. Teaching seemed the natural choice." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Alamosa's growing fast. They're lucky to get an educated woman willing to take on their young uns." As the night deepened around them, Daisy found herself sharing more about her life in Philadelphia, the loss of her mother when she was 12, and her father's declining health in recent years. Thomas was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions without prying. "You should try to get some rest," he eventually said, noticing her eyes growing heavy. "We've got a long ride tomorrow if we want to reach Alamosa by nightfall." He stood and retrieved a bedroll from his pack, laying it out near the fire. "Take this. I'll keep watch." Daisy wanted to protest, but exhaustion was overtaking her, her near drowning and subsequent shock having drained her energy. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton, for everything." "Tom," he corrected gently. "After fishing someone from a river, I reckon we can dispense with formalities." Daisy smiled, surprising herself. "Tom, then. Good night." She slept surprisingly well, waking only once in the night to find Tom sitting vigilant by the fire, his profile strong against the starlit sky. There was something comforting about his presence that allowed her to drift back to sleep without the fear that normally would have plagued her in such a vulnerable situation. Morning arrived with a brilliant sunrise, painting the New Mexico sky in hues of orange and pink. Daisy stirred to find Tom already awake, brewing fresh coffee over a rekindled fire. "Your clothes should be dry," he said, nodding toward her dress and petticoats that he discreetly hung on nearby branches the night before. "I'll take the horses to the river while you get dressed." Daisy appreciated his consideration for her modesty. Once alone, she quickly changed from the borrowed shirt and trousers Tom had lent her for sleeping into her now dry clothing. Her hair was a tangled mess, but she did her best to comb it with her fingers before twisting it into a practical braid. When Tom returned with the horses, he had the decency not to comment on her disheveled appearance. Instead, he offered her the last of the coffee and began packing up their small camp. "If we ride steady, we should reach Alamosa by dusk," he said, securing his bedroll to his saddle. "The terrain gets more challenging as we head north, but nothing your mare can't handle." As they set out, the morning air was crisp and clean, the trail ahead winding through scrubby juniper and piñon pines. Daisy found herself studying Tom's broad back as he rode ahead of her, leading the way. There was an easy confidence in how he sat his horse, as if he'd been born to the saddle. They rode in companionable silence for a while before Tom dropped back to ride alongside her. "So tell me, Miss Armstrong, what subjects will you be teaching in Alamosa?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, and history primarily," she replied. "Though I've been told I might have students of all ages, given the shortage of teachers in the area." "That's true enough," Tom agreed. "Nearest school before now was in Del Norte, too far for daily travel. Folks are mighty pleased to have their own school at last. And you, Mr. Thor Tom," she corrected herself with a small smile. "What drew you to ranching?" He was quiet for a moment, as if considering his answer. "Freedom, I suppose. After the war, I couldn't bear to be hemmed in by city walls or other men's rules. Out here, a man answers only to the land and the sky. And the weather and the market prices and the cattle," Daisy added with a gentle, teasing tone. Tom laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Fair enough. But it's still a sight better than taking orders or punching a clock." As the day progressed and they climbed in elevation, the landscape began to change, the desert scrub giving way to more abundant pine forests. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of hardtack and dried fruit. "How much farther?" Daisy asked, stretching her legs, which were growing stiff from the long ride. "We'll cross into Colorado territory in about an hour," Tom replied, studying the sun's position. "Alamosa's another 4 hours beyond that if the weather holds." As if summoned by his words, dark clouds began to gather on the northern horizon. Tom frowned, watching the sky. "We might not beat that storm to town. Best pick up the pace while we can." They rode hard for the next few hours, the threatening storm at their backs driving them forward. When they crossed into Colorado, Daisy felt a small thrill despite her exhaustion. This wild, beautiful land would be her home now, so different from the ordered streets and society of Philadelphia. The storm caught them just 2 hours shy of Alamosa. The rain came suddenly, a driving downpour that soaked them within minutes. Tom led them to a small cave set into a hillside, just large enough to shelter them and their horses from the worst of the deluge. "Sorry about this," he said, helping Daisy dismount. "Storms roll through quick this time of year, but they can be fierce." Huddled in the cave entrance, watching lightning fork across the darkened sky, Daisy was struck by the raw power of the landscape. "It's magnificent," she whispered. Tom looked at her with surprise. Most city folks would be complaining about the inconvenience. "I'm not most city folks," she replied with unexpected boldness. "Besides, after nearly drowning yesterday, a little rain doesn't seem so bad." Tom's face softened into a smile. "No, I suppose it doesn't." He hesitated before adding, "You're not what I expected, Daisy Armstrong." Something in his tone made her heart beat a little faster. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Definitely good," he said, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before he turned away to check on the horses. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. leaving the world washed clean and glistening in the late afternoon sunlight. They resumed their journey with Alamosa now just a few hours away. As they rode, Daisy found herself increasingly aware of Tom's presence beside her. There was something about him, his quiet strength, his unassuming kindness that drew her in a way no man ever had before. It was foolish, she knew. They had only just met, and her future in Alamosa depended on maintaining a respectable reputation. The town would expect their schoolteacher to be above reproach, particularly as an unmarried woman. The sun was setting when they finally crested a rise, and saw Alamosa spread before them in the valley below. It was larger than Daisy had expected, with several streets of wooden buildings, a church steeple rising prominently near the center, and scattered farms and ranches dotting the surrounding countryside. "Welcome to Alamosa," Tom said, gesturing toward the town. "It's not Philadelphia, but it's got good people." Daisy took a deep breath, feeling both excitement and nervousness flutter in her stomach. "It looks perfect." As they rode into town, several people called out greetings to Tom, who responded with friendly waves. Daisy was acutely aware of the curious glances cast her way as they made their way to the boarding house, where arrangements had been made for her lodging. Mrs. Winslow, the boarding house proprietress, was a plump, gray-haired woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took in Daisy's bedraggled appearance and raised an eyebrow as Tom explained about the river accident and the storm. "Well, Miss Armstrong, we've been expecting you," Mrs. Winslow said, her tone warming slightly. "Though not quite in this condition. Come in, come in. I'll have a hot bath drawn for you right away." Tom remained outside with the horses. When Daisy turned to thank him, she was struck by a sudden reluctance to say goodbye. "Mr. Thornton, Tom, I can never repay you for saving my life." He shook his head. "No need for repayment. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Daisy said firmly, "not anyone would have, nor would anyone have shown such kindness afterward." She held out her hand. "Thank you." Tom took her hand, his rough palm warm against her skin. "It was my pleasure, Miss Armstrong." He held her gaze for a moment before releasing her hand. "I'm sure I'll be seeing you around town." As Daisy watched him lead both horses toward the livery stable, she felt a curious emptiness, as if something important was slipping away. Shaking off the feeling, she turned to follow Mrs. Winslow inside, ready to begin her new life in Alamosa. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Daisy settled into her role as the town schoolteacher. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building on the edge of town, equipped with basic benches, a blackboard, and little else. Still, Daisy felt a surge of excitement as she prepared for her first day of classes. The town committee had arranged for 27 students, ranging in age from 6 to 16, to attend. Most were the children of farmers, ranchers, and townspeople, with a few from the outlying areas who would board in town during the week. On the morning of her first day, Daisy arrived early, her stomach fluttering with nerves as she arranged her meager teaching supplies on the desk. The door creaked open and she looked up, expecting to see an early student. Instead, Tom Thornton stood in the doorway, holding a small wooden crate. "Good morning," he said, seeming almost as surprised to see her as she was to see him. "I was just dropping off some supplies the town committee ordered." He set the crate on her desk. "Books, slates, chalk, and such." "Oh, thank you," Daisy said, flustered by his unexpected appearance. In the bright morning light, she noticed details she'd missed before the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, a small scar near his right temple, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. "Nervous about your first day?" he asked, nodding toward her hands which she realized were fidgeting with the chalk, She laughed self-consciously. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," he admitted with a warm smile. "But you'll do fine. These kids are eager to learn even if they don't always show it." Before she could respond, the door opened again, admitting a stream of children and ending their private conversation. Tom tipped his hat to her and slipped out, leaving Daisy to focus on her new charges. The first day was as challenging as it was rewarding. The younger children were full of energy and questions, while the older ones ranged from eager to learn to sullenly resistant. By the end of the day, Daisy was exhausted but satisfied. She had connected with most of the students and identified those who would need extra attention. As she was gathering her things to leave, the door opened once more. Tom stood there, hat in hand. "Thought you might want to know how your first day went," he said with a slight smile. "From the outside perspective." "Oh," Daisy raised an eyebrow, unable to suppress her own smile. "And how did it go, Mr. Thornton?" "Well, Miss Armstrong," he replied, stepping into the room. "Word around town is that the new schoolteacher is strict but fair, knows her subjects inside and out, and managed to get even Billy Jenkins interested in reading, which his ma says is nothing short of a miracle." Daisy laughed, feeling a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying ease from her shoulders. "I wouldn't go that far. Billy just needed the right material. Not all boys want to read about tea parties and proper manners." "What did you give him instead?" "A book about explorers and mountain men," Daisy said. "It was the only thing I could find that might appeal to a boy who'd rather be fishing than sitting in a classroom." Tom nodded approvingly. "Clever. Most teachers would try to force him into the standard curriculum." "Well, I figure he needs to learn to read before he can enjoy it, and he won't learn if he's not interested." She picked up her books and moved toward the door. "Were you really checking on my teaching reputation, or was there another reason for your visit?" Tom's expression grew slightly more serious. "Actually, I wanted to invite you to Sunday dinner at my ranch this weekend. Nothing formal, just a way to see a bit more of the countryside and meet some of your students' families in a social setting." He hurried to add, "Mrs. Winslow and Reverend Taylor will be there too, so it's all proper." Daisy felt a rush of pleasure at the invitation. "I'd like that very much, thank you." "Good," Tom said, seeming relieved. "I'll come by the boarding house around noon on Sunday then." As they walked together toward the center of town, Daisy found herself wondering about Tom's life. "You mentioned your ranch is north of town. Is it a large operation?" "Modest," he replied. "About 200 head of cattle, some horses. Enough to keep me busy, but not so much I can't manage with just a couple of hands." He glanced at her sideways. "It's a good life, if sometimes a solitary one." There was something in his tone that made Daisy wonder if he was lonely. Before she could pursue that thought, they reached the boarding house. "Thank you for checking on me," Daisy said as they stopped at the front gate. "It was kind of you." Tom smiled, that crooked lift of one side of his mouth making her heart beat a little faster. "See you Sunday, Miss Armstrong." The rest of the week passed quickly as Daisy settled into her teaching routine. She found herself looking forward to Sunday with an eagerness that both excited and concerned her. It wouldn't do to develop feelings for a man she barely knew, no matter how kind and handsome he might be. Her position in the community depended on her maintaining a certain propriety. Sunday arrived bright and clear, a perfect early autumn day. Daisy wore her best dress, a cornflower blue that matched her eyes, with a simple white lace collar. Mrs. Winslow gave her an appraising look as she came down the stairs. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said. "Thomas Thornton is a good man, you know, one of the most respected in the county." Daisy felt her cheeks warm. "We're just friends, Mrs. Winslow. He saved my life, that's all." Mrs. Winslow's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced, but she merely said, "Well, it's a fine day for a drive in the country." Tom arrived precisely at noon, driving a well-maintained buggy pulled by two matching sorrels. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing a crisp white shirt under a brown vest, and his usual denim trousers had been replaced by woolen ones. His hair was neatly combed, though a stubborn lock kept falling across his forehead. "Miss Armstrong," he said, helping her into the buggy. "You look lovely today." "Thank you," she replied, settling onto the seat beside him. "And thank you for inviting me." As they drove through town and out into the surrounding countryside, Tom pointed out local landmarks and introduced her to the people they passed. Everyone seemed to know and respect him, from the elderly shopkeeper who waved from his porch to the young cowboys who tipped their hats as they rode by. "You're quite popular," Daisy observed. Tom shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Small town. Everyone knows everyone." "It's more than that," she pressed. "They respect you." He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a bend in the road. "I try to deal fairly with folks, help when I can. That matters out here where people need to rely on each other." They crested a hill, and suddenly Tom's ranch came into view below them. It was nestled in a small valley, with a sturdy log house, several outbuildings and corrals containing horses and cattle. Beyond the immediate ranch buildings stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "It's beautiful," Daisy said sincerely, taking in the picturesque setting with mountains rising in the distance. "Home," Tom said simply, but there was pride in his voice as he guided the horses down the slope toward the ranch. As they approached, Daisy saw that several buggies and wagons were already parked near the house. Tom had mentioned other guests, but she hadn't expected quite so many. "I hope you don't mind," he said, noticing her surprise. "Folks were curious about the new teacher, and it seemed a good way for you to meet everyone at once." "Of course not," Daisy assured him, though she felt a flutter of nervousness. "It's very thoughtful." The gathering turned out to be larger than Daisy had anticipated, with nearly 20 adults and a dozen children scattered around Tom's property. There was a festive atmosphere, with tables set up under the trees, laden with food brought by the guests to supplement the beef Tom had provided from his own herd. Mrs. Winslow arrived shortly after them, as did Reverend Taylor and his wife. Daisy was introduced to so many people that she feared she'd never remember all their names, but everyone was welcoming and kind. As the afternoon progressed, Daisy found herself drawn into conversations with the mothers of her students, answering questions about their children's progress and her teaching methods. The men gathered around Tom, discussing cattle prices and the upcoming winter, while the children played games in the open yard. Daisy was speaking with Mrs. Jenkins about her son Billy's newfound interest in reading when she noticed Tom watching her from across the yard. When their eyes met, he didn't look away but gave her a warm smile that made her pulse quicken. She returned the smile before turning her attention back to Mrs. Jenkins, though she remained acutely aware of Tom's presence. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Tom found her sitting alone on the porch, taking a moment of quiet after the social exertion. "Too much company?" he asked, leaning against the porch railing. Daisy shook her head. "Not at all. Everyone's been lovely. I just needed a moment to catch my breath." He nodded, understanding. "Small towns can be overwhelming that way. Everyone wants to know you all at once." "It's a nice change from Philadelphia," she admitted. "There, people can live next door to each other for years and barely exchange greetings." Tom settled onto the porch step near her. "Would you like a tour of the place before everyone leaves? Might not get another quiet moment." The ranch was even more impressive up close. Tom showed her the barn, the corrals, and introduced her to his two ranch hands, Diego and Pete, who lived in a small bunkhouse near the main corral. He spoke with obvious pride about the improvements he'd made to the property, the quality of his breeding stock, and his plans for expansion. "This was all wilderness when I arrived," he told her as they walked along a creek that ran behind the house. "Took me almost a year just to build the house and clear enough land for the first corrals." "You built the house yourself?" Daisy asked, impressed. "With some help from neighbors," he acknowledged. "That's how it works out here. When someone needs to raise a barn or build a house, everyone pitches in. Then you do the same for them when the time comes." They stopped by a large cottonwood tree overlooking the creek. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground with golden light. It was peaceful here, the sounds of the gathering fading into the background. "Thank you for including me today," Daisy said. "It means a lot to be welcomed so warmly." "You're easy to welcome," Tom replied, his voice softer than usual. "Alamosa's lucky to have you as its teacher." Something in his tone made Daisy look up at him. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. There was a tension between them, a gentle pulling that Daisy could feel but wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. The spell was broken by the sound of Mrs. Winslow calling Daisy's name. "We should head back," Tom said, the moment passing. "Sounds like your chaperone is ready to leave." The ride back to town was quieter than the journey out, a comfortable silence between them as the sun began to set, painting the landscape in rich oranges and purples. Daisy found herself stealing glances at Tom's profile, admiring the strong line of his jaw and the gentle way he handled the horses. "Will I see you again soon?" she asked as they neared the boarding house, surprised by her own boldness. Tom's smile was warm in the fading light. "I expect so. Small town, remember?" But it was nearly 2 weeks before Daisy saw Tom again. Her teaching duties kept her busy, and according to town gossip, he had traveled to Denver on business. She told herself it was for the best. She needed to focus on establishing herself as a respected teacher, not developing feelings for a local rancher, no matter how kind or handsome. Yet she couldn't deny the leap her heart gave when she looked up from her desk one afternoon to find him standing in the schoolhouse doorway. The students had just left, and she was grading arithmetic papers. "Mr. Thornton," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray her pleasure at seeing him. "This is becoming a habit," he smiled, removing his hat as he stepped into the room. "A good one, I hope." He placed a small package on her desk. "Brought you something from Denver." Surprised, Daisy untied the brown paper to reveal a beautifully bound collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "How did you know?" she asked, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Mrs. Winslow mentioned you were reading a borrowed copy," he explained. "Thought you might like one of your own." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you, it's perfect." Tom shifted slightly, seeming almost nervous. "Actually, I had another reason for stopping by. The harvest dance is coming up next Saturday, and I was wondering if you might accompany me." The annual harvest dance was a major social event in Alamosa, held in the town hall after the fall crops were in. Daisy had heard her students talking about it with excitement. "I'd be delighted," she said, her heart racing at the prospect of spending an evening in Tom's company. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of anticipation. Daisy spent hours preparing her best dress, adding fresh lace to the collar and cuffs to make it more festive. Mrs. Winslow, who had clearly taken a maternal interest in Daisy's social life, offered advice on hair arrangements and even lent her a pretty shawl for the evening. When the night of the dance arrived, Daisy was a bundle of nerves. It had been years since she'd attended a social event as anything other than a chaperone or teacher. The idea of going as Tom's companion filled her with both excitement and trepidation. Tom arrived promptly, looking handsome in his best suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. His appreciative gaze as she descended the boarding house stairs made Daisy blush. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The town hall was transformed for the occasion, decorated with autumn leaves, bunting, and lanterns that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A local band played lively tunes while couples whirled around the dance floor. Nearly everyone in town seemed to be in attendance, from elderly couples who had been dancing together for 50 years to young people experiencing their first social event. Daisy felt conspicuous as they entered, aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed them. As the school teacher, she was a person of interest anyway, but arriving on Tom's arm added a new dimension to the gossip. "Everyone's staring," she murmured to Tom. "Let them," he replied, guiding her toward the dance floor as the band struck up a waltz. "They're just jealous I'm dancing with the prettiest woman in the room." Daisy laughed, relaxing as he swept her into the dance. Tom proved to be an excellent dancer, leading her confidently around the floor. His hand was warm at her waist, his steps sure and graceful despite his usual cowboy boots being replaced with polished shoes for the evening. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Daisy asked, surprised by his skill. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper manners, including dancing," he explained, guiding her through a turn. "Said a man never knows when such skills might come in handy." "She was right," Daisy said, enjoying the feel of his hand in hers, the strength of his arm supporting her. They danced several more times, pausing occasionally to chat with neighbors or refresh themselves at the punch bowl. Tom introduced her to more townspeople, always with a proud tone that made it clear he valued her company. As the evening progressed, the band played slower, more intimate tunes. During one such dance, Tom held her closer than propriety strictly allowed, his cheek nearly touching her hair. "Daisy," he said softly, using her first name for the first time that evening. "I'm glad you came to a mimosa." The simple statement, spoken with such sincerity, made her heart swell. "So am I," she replied, meaning it more than she would have thought possible a few weeks ago. Later, as the dance was winding down, Tom suggested they step outside for some fresh air. The night was cool but not cold, the stars brilliantly clear in the mountain sky. They walked a short distance from the hall, the music fading to a pleasant background melody. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Tom said, his voice serious as they stopped beneath a large oak tree. "That day at the river when I saw you go under." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I've never been so scared in my life." Daisy looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. "You didn't seem scared. You seemed brave and capable." "I was terrified," he admitted. "Not of the river, but of not reaching you in time." He took her hand gently in his. "I didn't know you then, but something told me I needed to, that you were important." Daisy's heart thundered in her chest. "Tom, I know it's fast," he continued. "We've only known each other a short while, but out here people don't waste time when they find something worth holding on to." His fingers tightened slightly around hers. "And you, Daisy Armstrong, are definitely worth holding on to." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her, a gentle press of his lips against hers that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers for a reaction. "I'm sorry if that was too forward," he began, but Daisy shook her head. "It wasn't," she whispered, surprised by her own boldness. "I'm glad you did it." Tom smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Does that mean I can do it again sometime?" "I think that could be arranged," she replied, returning his smile. Their courtship progressed rapidly after that night. Tom became a regular visitor at the schoolhouse, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers, books, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a barn, and escorting Daisy on walks through town or drives in the countryside on Sundays after church. The townspeople watched with approving interest. Thomas Thornton was well respected in Alamosa, and Daisy had quickly earned their admiration with her dedication to teaching their children. Most saw the match as ideal, though there were a few raised eyebrows at the speed of the romance. Mrs. Winslow, for her part, maintained a careful balance between encouraging the relationship and ensuring propriety was observed. "Things move faster out here than back east," she told Daisy one evening as they sat knitting by the fire. "But a woman still needs to guard her reputation, especially one in your position." "I understand," Daisy assured her. "Tom has been nothing but respectful." "Oh, I know that," Mrs. Winslow said with a knowing smile. "Thomas Thornton is a gentleman through and through. I'm just saying that when hearts are involved, sometimes heads don't think as clearly as they should." As autumn deepened toward winter, Daisy found herself falling more deeply in love with both Tom and the life she was building in Alamosa. The town had embraced her, the children were progressing well in their studies, and whenever she was with Tom, she felt a sense of rightness she'd never experienced before. One crisp November afternoon, Tom invited her to go riding with him to a special place he wanted to show her. With Mrs. Winslow's blessing secured after Tom promised they'd return well before dark, Daisy set out with him on horseback. They rode north from town, following the river that had brought them together, though they stayed well away from its banks. The day was clear and cold, their breath fogging in the air as they climbed higher into the foothills. "Where exactly are we going?" Daisy asked as they followed a narrow trail through a stand of aspen trees, their leaves golden against the blue sky. "You'll see," Tom replied mysteriously. Just a little farther. The trail opened suddenly onto a small meadow, ringed by pines and aspens, with a breathtaking view of the valley below. Alamosa was visible in the distance, a tiny collection of buildings nestled along the river. "Oh, Tom," Daisy breathed, taking in the spectacular vista. "It's beautiful. I found this place my first year here," he said, helping her dismount. "I come up whenever I need to think or make important decisions." He led her to a flat rock near the edge of the meadow where they could sit and admire the view. "And what important decision brings us here today?" Daisy asked, settling beside him on the sun-warmed stone. Tom didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Daisy's heart began to race as he turned to face her fully. "Daisy Armstrong," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond. "I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to suspect his intentions, the actual moment took her breath away. Looking into Tom's earnest face, Daisy saw everything she wanted: love, respect, partnership, a future filled with possibility. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and sure. "Yes, Tom, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy," he whispered. "You already do," she replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to dip toward the horizon, talking of their future together. Tom wanted to marry as soon as possible, while Daisy felt they should wait until after Christmas, when the school would be on break. 3 months seems like an eternity, Tom grumbled good-naturedly as they rode back toward town. It will give us time to prepare properly, Daisy reasoned, and for my aunt in Denver to travel here for the wedding. I suppose you're right, he conceded. Besides, it gives me time to add on to the house. I've been thinking about building a proper library for you with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Daisy deeply. You do that for me, Daisy, he said, his expression serious. I'd do anything for you. Building bookshelves is just the beginning. News of their engagement spread quickly through Alamosa. The townspeople were universally approving, with many expressing that they'd seen it coming from the moment Tom pulled Daisy from the river. The school board was supportive as well, agreeing that Daisy could continue teaching after her marriage if she wished. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Daisy continued teaching while also preparing for the wedding. Her students were delighted by her engagement, the younger ones asking innocent questions about whether she'd still be Miss Armstrong after she was married, the older girls sighing romantically over the story of how Tom had saved her from drowning. Tom, meanwhile, threw himself into expanding his home to accommodate his bride. With the help of friends and neighbors, he added 2 rooms to the house, a library for Daisy and a larger bedroom for them to share. He ordered furniture from Denver, had curtains made by the local seamstress, and even planted fruit trees that would bloom in the spring, though Daisy wouldn't see their flowers until after they were married. As Christmas approached, Daisy's Aunt Harriet arrived from Denver, a stern-faced woman who nonetheless showed surprising warmth toward Tom after a thorough interrogation about his intentions and prospects. She brought with her trunks of household items, including linens and dishes that had belonged to Daisy's mother, as well as a beautiful wedding dress that she had commissioned as her gift to her niece. The wedding was set for December 28th, during the school's winter break. The entire town seemed involved in the preparations, with the women organizing food for the reception, the men ensuring the church was in perfect condition, and even the children contributing by decorating the schoolhouse, where the celebration would be held after the ceremony. On the morning of her wedding day, Daisy woke early, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. In just a few hours, she would be Mrs. Thomas Thornton, a thought that filled her with joy and nervous anticipation. As her aunt helped her dress, arranging her hair in an elegant style crowned with a wreath of winter holly and white roses, Daisy thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. Had she not fallen into the river that day, had Tom not been there to save her, their paths might never have crossed. "You look beautiful, my dear," Aunt Harriet said, her usual briskness softened by emotion as she stepped back to admire her handiwork. "Your mother would be so proud." Daisy blinked back tears, touching the locket around her neck that contained a tiny portrait of her parents. "I wish they could be here." "They are in their way," Harriet assured her, patting her hand. "Now let's not keep that fine young man of yours waiting any longer." The church was filled to capacity, decorated with evergreen boughs, red berries, and white candles that cast a warm glow over the assembled guests. As Daisy stood at the back, arm linked with Reverend Taylor, who had agreed to give her away, she saw Tom waiting at the altar, his expression a mixture of nervousness and joy. When the music began, and she started her walk down the aisle, everything else faded away. There was only Tom, his eyes never leaving hers as she moved toward him, toward their future together. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with traditional vows spoken in clear, unwavering voices. When Reverend Taylor pronounced them husband and wife, Tom's kiss was gentle but full of promise, bringing a chorus of happy sighs and a few good-natured cheers from the congregation. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Daisy moved through the crowd in a happy daze, her hand rarely leaving Tom's as they accepted congratulations and well wishes from everyone in attendance. As the festivities continued into the evening, Tom leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Thornton." The words sent a thrill through Daisy. Home. Their home. "Yes," she replied, squeezing his hand. "I'm ready." They slipped away amid a shower of rice and well wishes, climbing into the buggy Tom had decorated with ribbons and evergreen boughs for the occasion. As they drove through the winter night toward the ranch that was now their shared home, Daisy leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she'd never imagined possible when she first set out for Alamosa. "Happy?" Tom asked, wrapping an arm around her to keep her warm. "Completely," she assured him, tilting her face up for a kiss. When they reached the ranch, Tom surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Inside, a fire blazed in the hearth, casting warm light over the rooms that had been transformed in anticipation of her arrival. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new rugs covered the floors, and flowers hothouse blooms from Denver filled vases throughout the house. But it was the library that brought tears to Daisy's eyes. Just as he'd promised, Tom had built floor-to-ceiling bookshelves along 2 walls, with a comfortable window seat overlooking the creek, perfect for reading on sunny afternoons. A writing desk stood in one corner, complete with paper, pens, and ink. "You like it?" Tom asked, watching her reaction anxiously. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to wrap her arms around his neck. "Everything is perfect." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a joining of bodies that matched the joining of their hearts. Afterward, lying in each other's arms as the fire burned low in the grate, they talked of their hopes and dreams for the future they would build together. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Daisy continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on a beautiful mare Tom had given her as a wedding gift. In the afternoons, she would return to the ranch, where Tom often met her halfway, eager to hear about her day. Their life together settled into a rhythm of work and love, busy days and peaceful evenings. Tom's business prospered, allowing him to expand his herd and hire additional hands. Daisy's school flourished as well, with more families moving to the area drawn by the promise of quality education for their children. In late April, as the fruit trees Tom had planted burst into bloom, Daisy made a discovery that added new joy to their already happy life. "Tom," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, curious at the special tone in her voice. "What is it, love?" "I visited Dr. Simmons today," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Tom's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the span of seconds. "A baby? Really?" When she nodded, he whooped with delight, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around before setting her down carefully. "When?" "November," she said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "The doctor says I'm about 2 months along." Tom dropped to his knees before her, pressing a gentle kiss to her stomach through her dress. "Hello in there, little one," he said softly. "Your mama and papa can't wait to meet you." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Tom built a nursery adjoining their bedroom, crafting a cradle from aspen wood with his own hands. Daisy sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her heart full of anticipation as she imagined the child who would wear them. As her condition became more apparent, the school board arranged for a substitute teacher to take over her classes for the remainder of the year, though they assured her the position would be held for her return when she was ready. October arrived with a blaze of autumn colors, the aspen trees turning gold against the evergreen backdrop. Daisy's time was growing close, and Tom hovered anxiously, reluctant to leave her alone for even short periods. He'd arranged for Mrs. Winslow to come stay with them as the birth approached, her experience with many such occasions a comfort to both expectant parents. The baby, however, had plans of its own. One crisp morning in late October, while Tom was checking on a sick calf in the far pasture, Daisy felt the first sharp pain that signaled the beginning of labor. She was alone in the house, the nearest ranch hand at least a mile away in the barn. Trying to remain calm, she sent the kitchen boy, who had been delivering eggs, to fetch both Tom and Mrs. Winslow. Then she prepared as best she could, laying out clean linens and heating water on the stove between increasingly intense contractions. Tom arrived first, his face pale with worry as he burst through the door. "Daisy, are you all right? The boy said the baby's coming." "It's definitely coming," she confirmed, gripping the edge of the table as another contraction washed over her. "But I don't think it's going to wait for Mrs. Winslow." Tom's expression was one of pure panic for a moment before determination took its place. "Then we'll manage without her. Tell me what to do." With remarkable composure considering the circumstances, Daisy directed her husband in preparing for the birth. By the time Mrs. Winslow arrived, breathless and carrying her midwife's bag, Daisy was well into active labor. The birth was long and difficult, stretching into the night. Tom refused to leave Daisy's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow and whispering encouragement through each contraction. When she felt she couldn't continue, his steady presence gave her strength. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room and their hearts. Mrs. Winslow cleaned and wrapped the infant before placing him in Daisy's arms. "He's perfect," Daisy whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes through tears of joy and exhaustion. Tom sat beside them on the bed, one arm around his wife, the other gently touching his son's downy head. "Look what we did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's amazing. You're amazing." They named him Samuel James Thornton, after both their fathers. Sam, as he quickly became known, was a healthy, strong baby with his father's hazel eyes and a shock of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as Tom's. As winter settled over the ranch, the new family nestled into their home, adjusting to the rhythms of life with an infant. Tom proved to be a devoted father, often carrying Sam in a sling across his chest as he went about his less dangerous ranch duties. Daisy recovered quickly from the birth, though she decided to delay her return to teaching until the following autumn, wanting to savor these precious first months with her son. Their first Christmas as a family was simple but meaningful, with a small tree cut from their own land and decorated with handmade ornaments. They exchanged modest gifts, a new journal for Daisy, a fine leather belt for Tom, saving their real extravagance for presents for Sam, who was far too young to appreciate them, but delighted in the colorful paper and ribbons nonetheless. As they sat before the fire that Christmas night, Sam sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Daisy leaned against her husband's shoulder. "I was thinking about the river today," she said quietly. Tom looked down at her, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "The river." "Where we met," she clarified. "If I hadn't fallen in, if you hadn't been there to pull me out." "Don't," Tom said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I can't bear to think about what might have happened." "No," Daisy said, turning to face him. "That's not what I meant." I was thinking how something that seemed so terrible at the time turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life. If I hadn't fallen into that river, we might never have met." Tom smiled, understanding dawning in his eyes. "When you put it that way, I'm almost grateful you decided to cool your feet in the most dangerous part of the Pecos." Daisy laughed, swatting his arm playfully. "I didn't decide to fall in, you know." "I know," he said, his expression growing serious again. "But I'll be grateful every day of my life that I was there to pull you out." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Daisy Thornton. You and Sam are everything to me." "And you're everything to us," she replied, leaning forward to kiss him. As the fire crackled and their son slept nearby, they held each other close, secure in the knowledge that sometimes life's most frightening moments can lead to its greatest joys. What had begun as a near tragedy at a riverside had blossomed into a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives together. Years passed, and the Thornton family flourished. Daisy returned to teaching part-time as Sam grew, eventually taking on the role of headmistress when the town built a larger school to accommodate its growing population. Tom expanded his ranch operations, becoming one of the most successful cattlemen in the county while maintaining his reputation for fair dealings and community involvement. Sam was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 3 years later, and then by twins, Michael and Margaret, 2 years after that. The Thornton children grew up surrounded by love and learning, as comfortable on horseback as they were with books. Alamosa grew from a frontier town into a thriving community, with the railroad bringing new opportunities and residents. Through it all, Tom and Daisy remained at its heart, their love story becoming something of a local legend, retold at gatherings and celebrations. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town threw a surprise celebration in their honor. As they danced together under the stars, just as they had at that first harvest dance, Tom pulled Daisy close. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming west, falling into that river, marrying a rough cowboy instead of some city gentleman?" Daisy looked up at the man who had been her rescuer, her friend, her lover, her partner, and the father of her children. His hair was streaked with silver now, his face lined from years of working in the sun, but his eyes still held the same warmth and love that had captured her heart all those years ago. "Not for a single moment," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as their friends and family looked on, smiling at the couple whose love story had begun with a desperate rescue and blossomed into a lifetime of happiness. For Daisy and Tom, what had started as a chance encounter at a riverside had become a love as vast and enduring as the western landscape they called home, a love that would continue to guide and sustain them through all the adventures yet to come.